Welcome to Life Stories, where we bring you inspiring tales of courage, transformation, and rediscovery. Today's story is about Sarah, a woman who faced betrayal and heartbreak but found the strength to reclaim her life and rebuild her future. From the pain of an unappreciated marriage to the triumph of building her own success, Sarah's journey is a testament to resilience and self-love. Subscribe to our channel to begin today's story with Life Stories, a powerful reminder that it's never too late to rewrite your own narrative and embrace the happiness you deserve. I remember the moment so vividly, the sound of the book hitting the table. The slight echo it made in the quiet room. Jake muttered, "Useless," under his breath, as if dismissing something trivial. Something that didn't matter. The book in question was a scrapbook. A handmade gift I had spent weeks creating. My hands had pored over each page, carefully choosing photos, writing captions, and weaving together memories from our life together. It wasn't just a gift, it was a piece of my heart. I stared at him, my chest tightening, unsure whether to cry, shout, or simply sit there in stunned silence. For a brief moment, I held on to the faint hope that he might reconsider. That perhaps he hadn't understood the thought behind it. But instead, he looked up at me, annoyance written all over his face. "What is this?" he asked, waving a hand dismissively toward the book as if it were trash. "This is the best you could come up with? A pile of pictures and sentimental garbage? You're ridiculous." "Sarah." My hands clenched in my lap. The sting of his words hit me hard. But I forced myself to stay calm. "I thought you'd appreciate something meaningful," I said, my voice soft but steady. "It's a collection of memories. Everything we've been through together." Jake rolled his eyes, leaning back in his chair. "What we've been through? Please. I'm tired of all this overly emotional crap. You could have gotten me something useful. But instead, you waste time on this nonsense. It's embarrassing." I took a deep breath, trying to keep the sting of his words from showing on my face. My throat tightened, but I refused to let him see me break. "Jake," I began. But he interrupted me, standing up abruptly and running a hand through his hair in frustration. "You don't get it, do you?" he snapped. "This isn't working anymore. You're not working anymore. I need someone who can actually add value to my life, not drag me down with this pathetic attempt to be thoughtful." His words twisted in my stomach, sharp and cruel. "What are you saying?" I asked, though a part of me already knew. He crossed his arms and smirked. "I'm leaving you, Sarah. I've met someone else. Madison. She's 20. Exciting. And she actually knows how to have fun. Unlike you." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Madison. 20. Exciting. The comparisons swirled in my head, each one landing like a blow. I felt my knees weaken, but I refused to let him see the full impact of his betrayal. "And you think this is the right way to tell me?" I asked, my voice trembling but steady. "After I've put my heart into this?" He laughed, a cold, dismissive sound. "Your heart. That's the problem, Sarah. You're all heart and no substance. I deserve more." For a moment, I sat there, frozen in place. His words echoed in my mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. But then, something shifted. A strange calm washed over me, and before I could stop myself, I started to laugh. It wasn't a bitter laugh or a forced one. It was genuine and loud, cutting through the tension in the room like a knife. Jake narrowed his eyes. "What's so funny?" I stood up, still laughing, and reached for the scrapbook. "You don't even know what you're walking away from," I said, flipping to the back page. He frowned, suspicion creeping into his expression. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out a folded document tucked into the final page and held it up. "This," I said, "is the deed to a vacation house. I bought it for us. I was going to surprise you tonight. But I guess that's off the table now." His jaw dropped. For the first time all evening, he was at a loss for words. You bought a vacation house, he stammered, his confidence crumbling. I smiled sweetly and slipped the deed into my purse. Looks like Madison won't be enjoying that. Will she? Jake's face twisted into something between disbelief and panic. You bought a house, he finally said, his voice unsteady. Since when do you make decisions like that? I tilted my head, my smile never wavering. Since I realized I can't depend on you for anything meaningful. Jake. While you were busy finding excitement with a 20-year-old. I was building a future for us. Silly me for thinking we wanted the same things. He opened his mouth to retort but closed it again, his eyes darting to the scrapbook still lying on the table. It was as if he were trying to figure out how all of this had slipped through his fingers. You're overreacting, he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. This doesn't change anything. Madison and you? I cut him off, shaking my head. Jake. I don't care. Take her. Take your exciting life and get out of mine. You've made it abundantly clear where I stand. I turned and walked toward the bedroom we once shared, the sound of his sputtering excuses following me as I packed an overnight bag. I could hear him pacing, probably trying to figure out how to salvage the situation without admitting he had completely miscalculated. As I zipped up my bag, my gaze fell on the photos on the dresser, wedding pictures, snapshots from vacations, moments that once seemed so full of promise. They felt like relics from another life, one I had been clinging to for far too long. When I returned to the living room, Jake was standing by the door, his arms crossed in what I assumed was an attempt to look composed. You're really just going to leave? He asked, his tone incredulous. I am, I said simply, brushing past him. This is ridiculous, he snapped. You're being petty, Sarah. You'll regret this. I paused at the door, turning back to face him. Maybe. But at least I won't regret staying in a marriage where I'm nothing but a punchline to you. With that, I stepped outside. The night air was cool against my face, and as I drove away with the deed safely tucked in my bag, I felt a strange sense of relief. I wasn't just leaving with my belongings, I was leaving with something far more valuable, the clarity that I deserved better. Let Jake have his fun. I was done playing the role of the loyal wife in his selfish little game. And for the first time in years, I felt free. When I pulled up to Emily's house later that night, the exhaustion finally hit me. Emily was my oldest and dearest friend, the person I could always turn to when life felt too heavy to bear. As I knocked on her door, I felt a mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and a strange sense of triumph. She opened the door in her pajamas, her curly hair tied up in a messy bun. One look at my face, and her expression shifted from surprise to concern. What did he do this time? She asked, crossing her arms as though ready for battle. Can I come in? I asked, my voice steady but tired. Of course. She stepped aside, waving me into the familiar warmth of her home. Kitchen or living room? Kitchen, I said, knowing she'd already be reaching for a bottle of wine. Minutes later, we were seated at her small, cozy kitchen table. A glass of Merlot sat in front of me, and Emily's undivided attention was focused across from me. So she said, leaning back in her chair, spill. I took a deep breath, recounting everything, the scrapbook, Jake's cruel words, his announcement about Madison, and finally, my revelation about the vacation house. As I spoke, Emily's jaw dropped lower and lower. He called you useless? After everything you've done for him, she said, her voice rising with indignation. And then he has the audacity to tell you he's leaving for some 20-year-old. Are you kidding me? I shook my head, swirling the wine in my glass. Nope. That's Jake. Always so self-assured. Always thinking I'd just roll over and accept it. But you didn't. Emily's face broke into a proud smile. You walked out. You took back the house. Honestly, Sarah. Good for you. Hearing her say it out loud made something inside me shift. She was right. I hadn't just walked out on Jake, I had walked out on years of trying to mold myself into someone he could appreciate, someone who would never be enough for him. No matter what I did. What now? Emily asked, snapping me out of my thoughts. I don't know. I admitted. I've been so wrapped up in making our marriage work that I don't even know who I am outside of it. Emily reached across the table and placed a hand over mine. You figure it out. One step at a time. But first, you stay here tonight. No arguing. I smiled, grateful for her unwavering support. Thanks, Em. That night, as I lay on her couch under a cozy throw blanket, the weight of the day finally caught up with me, beneath the tiredness. Though, there was something else, relief. Jake was no longer my problem. For years, I had bent over backward to make him happy, and now I didn't have to. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited to find out. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating relentlessly on the coffee table. Groaning, I reached for it, squinting at the screen. Missed calls, 6. Text messages, 14. All from Jake. I unlocked my phone and scrolled through the barrage of messages. Where did you go? We need to talk. You're being childish. Sarah. You can't just walk away like this. The last one made me laugh bitterly. Walk away. That's exactly what he told me he was doing last night. Emily wandered into the living room, a cup of coffee in hand. Let me guess. Jake. Bingo. I held up the phone, shaking my head. He's losing it. Well, what did he expect? She said, setting the coffee down in front of me. You don't get to treat someone like garbage and then act shocked when they stop putting up with it. I nodded, sipping the coffee. He's not used to consequences. He's always gotten away with everything, his arrogance, his selfishness. But this time, he's not getting what he wants. Damn right. He's not, Emily said with a satisfied grin. Later that day, another text came through. I'll come by the house later. We need to sort this out. My house. He was still acting like it was his. Like he had any right to come and go as he pleased. I thought about replying, telling him to stay away. But Emily's voice echoed in my mind, let him stew in it for a while. Instead, I ignored the text and spent the day helping Emily with errands and catching up on parts of my life I'd neglected for years. We laughed, reminisced, and, for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a spark of joy. When I finally returned to the house that evening, Jake's car was already parked in the driveway. I parked on the street, taking a deep breath before walking up to the door. He was pacing in the living room when I stepped inside, his expression a mix of anger and desperation. You finally decided to show up, he said, his voice sharp. I live here, I replied calmly, setting my purse down on the counter. What are you doing here? We need to talk, he said, his tone softening. This has gotten out of hand. I folded my arms, leaning against the counter. What's gotten out of hand? Jake. The fact that I finally stood up for myself. Or the fact that you're realizing Madison isn't the prize you thought she was. His jaw tightened. And for a moment, I thought he might explode. But instead, he sat down on the couch, running a hand through his hair. Look, I made a mistake. Okay. I wasn't thinking clearly, but we can fix this. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. Fix this? Jake. This isn't a broken vase. This is years of you taking me for granted, dismissing everything I do, and expecting me to keep smiling through it. Sarah, he started, but I cut him off. No. You don't get to decide when we fix things. You made your choice. Now you can live with it. Grabbing my bag, I walked upstairs, leaving him sitting there in stunned silence. For the first time, I didn't feel small in the face of his words. I felt strong. This was just the beginning. And it was my beginning. The day after Jake's attempt to patch things up, I knew it was time to take control of my life in ways I never had before. While he had left the house that evening after my firm refusal to entertain his excuses, his presence still lingered in the way the furniture was arranged, in the photographs that sat on shelves, and in the heavy feeling of a house that no longer felt like mine. So, I made a decision. That morning, I started packing Jake's belongings. Every shirt, tie, and trinket went into boxes. The process felt cathartic, almost therapeutic, as though each item I removed lightened the air in the house. By midday, the boxes were stacked neatly by the front door, a tangible symbol of reclaiming my space. When he returned later that evening, his signature smugness was back. Jake strode up the driveway as if nothing had happened, his confidence unshaken despite my earlier words. I met him at the door, my expression firm, and handed him a folder. "What's this?" he asked, glancing down at the papers inside. "Your things," I replied, gesturing to the boxes beside the door. "And this," I tapped the folder, "is the contact information for the lawyer I hired this morning. You'll be hearing from her soon." His jaw tightened, and his eyes narrowed. "You're being ridiculous, Sarah. You can't handle life without me." I smiled faintly, unbothered by his attempt to provoke me. "We'll see about that. Now, get off my porch." For a moment, he stood there, his confidence faltering as he realized I was serious. Then, with a clenched jaw, he grabbed his things and left without another word. I watched him drive away, and as his car disappeared from view, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The house was quieter, cleaner, and for the first time, it felt like mine, not ours. Not his. Mine. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into rediscovering myself and my life. Grace, my unwavering cheerleader, was there every step of the way, over glasses of wine at my kitchen table. She reminded me of the person I had been before Jake, a person I was beginning to see glimpses of again. "Good riddance," Grace said one night as I told her about Jake's departure. "He was a leech. Sarah, you're better off without him." I nodded, knowing she was right. But there were still quiet moments, usually late at night, when doubt crept in. Had I done the right thing? What if I ended up regretting it? Those thoughts didn't last long, though. Especially not after I received a call from Jake a few weeks later. "Sarah," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "We need to talk." I sighed, already tired of the conversation before it even began. "What do you want?" "Jake." "It's Madison," he spat, bitterness dripping from every word. "She's gone." I felt a smirk tug at the corner of my mouth. "Oh." She laughed at me, he continued, the words spilling out in a rush. "Said I was pathetic. Said I threw away the only good thing I had going for me. She couldn't believe I let you keep the house." Now, I was smiling outright. "Ah. The house. I'm sure that stung." "She said I was an idiot," he added, ignoring my sarcasm. "A complete loser for losing everything you worked for." And then she walked out. It was almost too satisfying to hear him admit it. The man who had dismissed me, belittled me, and thought he could replace me with someone younger was finally facing the consequences of his actions. "And now you're calling me because..." I prompted, my tone cool. "Because I made a mistake," he said, his voice dropping. "A huge mistake. Can we talk? Please?" I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "No. Jake. We have nothing to talk about. You made your bed, now you can lie in it." Before he could respond, I hung up. The silence that followed was comforting, like a warm blanket wrapping around me. That night, as I sat on the couch with a cup of tea, I felt a deep sense of relief. Jake's life was unraveling. But for the first time, it wasn't my problem. The divorce process moved faster than I had anticipated. My lawyer, efficient and empathetic, helped me organize my finances, document everything, and ensure that I'd be protected. Sitting in her office one afternoon, Reviewing the finalized paperwork, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, closure, and a lingering twinge of disbelief that this chapter of my life was finally ending. "Everything looks solid," my lawyer said, flipping through the pages. "Jake doesn't have much leverage here, especially since he hasn't contested anything. Frankly, I think he knows he's not in a position to fight you." I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. "I think he's finally realized I'm not the pushover he thought I was." She chuckled. "I'd say you've made that very clear." As I left her office that afternoon, a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying seemed to lift. The paperwork was filed. My finances were secure. And Jake was officially out of my life on paper and in reality. That evening, Grace came over with a bottle of wine to celebrate. "To Sarah," she said, raising her glass. "The woman who finally kicked Jake to the curb and reclaimed her life." I laughed, clinking my glass against hers. "To Grace," I replied. "The friend who never once said, 'I told you so.'" "Not yet. Anyway," she teased, taking a sip. As the night wore on, we talked about everything: my plans for the future, her latest escapades, and, of course, Jake's dramatic fall from grace. "Do you think he's still crying over Madison?" Grace asked, leaning back on the couch with a smirk. "Probably," I replied, grinning. "But it's not like he has much else going for him. No wife, no house, no mistress. Honestly, I almost feel bad for him." "Almost," Grace said, laughing. That night, after she left, I sat alone in the quiet of my home, reflecting on everything that had happened. The old me, the one who bent over backward to keep Jake happy, who worried endlessly about his approval, felt like a distant memory. This new version of myself, the one who could laugh at his downfall and find joy in reclaiming my life, was here to stay. As I sat on the deck of my vacation home, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the lake with hues of gold and pink. A year ago, I never imagined this life would be mine: free, content, and full of possibilities. Walking away from Jake wasn't just about ending a toxic relationship, it was about rediscovering myself and embracing the future I deserved. Phoenix Consulting, the business I built from scratch, was thriving. But it was more than just a professional achievement, it was a symbol of my resilience. The quiet moments, the laughter with friends, and the joy of creating a life on my terms reminded me every day that I was capable of more than I'd ever believed. Jake was a distant memory now, and his texts and calls no longer fazed me. I had moved on. Not out of bitterness but out of love for myself. My story wasn't just about survival, it was about thriving after heartbreak. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring tales of resilience and transformation. Let today's story remind you, it's never too late to reclaim your happiness.